Snow drifted across the square as a little girl stood trembling in her torn Christmas dress, clutching a worn tote. Other children pointed and laughed.
Looks like Christmas threw up on you.
She didn't fight back, just bit her lip and looked away. Until a lonely man overheard, turned, and slowly walked toward her. What he did next didn't just silence the square. It gave her a Christmas she'd never forget. Hey friends, it's Mr. Dawn. I'm really glad you came back. Feels good to have someone to share these stories with. Some of them, they just stick with you. Let's sit together for a while and see how one quiet moment turned a cruel laugh into something truly unforgettable. And let's begin. Savannah shimmered that December evening, dressed in warm southern lights that wrapped around the iron balconies and moss-covered trees like a city trying to remember something kind. Horse-drawn carriages rolled slowly past colonial brick buildings, their wheels whispering over cobblestones. Christmas music drifted from open shop doors, and laughter rang out from tourists cradling warm cider in mittened hands. But inside the grand ballroom of the Marshall House Hotel, the warmth felt artificial, too polished, too choreographed. Graham Wolfe stood near the window, a glass of untouched bourbon in his hand, his reflection mingling with the blinking lights beyond the glass. His navy blue suit was flawless, cufflinks glinting beneath the chandelier light, though he'd already removed them and slipped them into his pocket without realizing it. People toasted in groups behind him. Camera flashes caught the angles of painted smiles. Somewhere, a jazz band played a reworked version of "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas," but it felt hollow. He didn't belong here, not really. The hotel was his. The gala was his. The foundation behind the scholarship fund they were honoring tonight had his name etched across its marble plaque in the lobby. But the applause, the thanks, the speeches, it all slid past him like rain on glass. He was here, and yet not. Graham's assistant, Everett, had asked him earlier if he wanted to say a few words to the guests. "Something warm, sir. Something about hope," Everett had suggested gently. Graham had declined without looking up from his phone. Now, as a flurry of laughter erupted behind him, he stepped away from the crowd. He slipped out through the hotel's side exit and into the cold. The air bit sharper outside. Savannah wasn't known for its snow, but this year had been odd. Cold enough for breath to fog, for frost to cling to window panes. Graham crossed into Chippewa Square, his shoes soundless on the pavement. A man of wealth, of power, of systems and decisions. But tonight, he felt like a ghost in a city full of light. That's when he heard it. Laughter again. But not the sweet, drunken kind. This was sharper, mocking. He turned toward the sound, instinct rising before reason. Near the square's fountain, under the light of a flickering lamppost, a small crowd of kids had gathered. At the center of them stood a girl, thin, still, her arms clutching a canvas tote against her chest. Her red velvet dress fluttered slightly in the breeze. Or maybe it had once been velvet. Now it was faded, the hem uneven, and along one side a tear had been stitched up with large, clumsy thread, bright white against the deep red fabric.
That dress looks like Christmas threw up on it.
A boy jeered, sending the others into shrieking laughter.
She looks like a rag doll,
Another said. The girl didn't respond. She didn't cry. She didn't run. She just stood there, chin tilted slightly upward, defiance flickering in her posture, though her shoulders were tight, her fingers white around the strap of the tote bag. She was trying, desperately, to stand taller than she felt. Graham didn't think. He moved. The kids scattered when he approached. No words needed. His size, his silence, his presence in that tailored coat was enough. The kind of man kids instinctively knew not to mess with. Now it was just her and him. She looked down at her feet. He crouched slightly, not to intimidate, but to level the field. "Hey," he said, his voice low. "You okay?" She didn't look up.
It's fine.
He hesitated. "That dress, it's nice." She glanced up then, just a flicker of her eyes.
It was my mom's.
She said softly.
Nana fixed it so I could wear it to the square today.
He caught the word. Was?
She died. Last spring.
The answer came too easily, like it had been repeated so many times that it had lost its right to sting out loud. Graham nodded slowly, swallowing against the lump that suddenly formed in his throat. "It looks special,"
It is.
she said. Then, after a pause,
She wore it every Christmas, even when we didn't have a tree.
the girl hugged her tote tighter. "What's your name?" he asked, though something in him already braced.
Hazel.
She said.
Hazel Bennett.
His heart stalled. Bennett. The name hit him like a sudden gust of winter air. It slammed through the walls he thought were fortified by time and distance. "Bennett?" he asked, voice barely a whisper. Hazel nodded, her blonde hair falling from behind her ear.
That was her name too, Marin Bennett. She used to paint by the river walk, before she got sick.
Marin. That name didn't just sting, it cut. He hadn't heard it in years, hadn't spoken it, had buried it under mergers and milestones and stock quotes. And yet now, in front of him, stood a girl with her name, her face, and her stillness. Hazel. He straightened slowly, his voice gone, his breath visible in the cold. "I'm Graham," he said, because it was all he could manage. She didn't react. The name clearly meant nothing to her. Somehow, that hurt more than if she had flinched.
Nice to meet you, mister.
She said politely. Practiced. And then, without another word, she turned and walked toward the edge of the square, red velvet trailing behind her like a memory trying to hold on. Graham stood there long after she disappeared. Behind him, the hotel glittered. Inside, they were raising glasses to his name. But here, in the cold, something real had cracked open. Something raw. Hazel Bennett, daughter of Marin. As the wind picked up and Christmas bells rang distantly through the streets of Savannah, Graham Wolfe reached into his pocket and felt the cold metal of his cufflinks, the ones he had removed without thinking. And he finally understood why. He didn't feel like that man anymore. And for the first time in a very long time, he didn't want to. The morning came with soft rain in Savannah, the kind that made the brick streets shine like copper and the Spanish moss glisten along the trees. The city had a hush to it. No storm, no chaos, just a kind of quiet that made everything feel more intimate. Graham Wolfe stepped out of the back seat of his black Lincoln at the edge of Chippewa Square, his umbrella still folded. His assistant had assumed he was headed to the East Bay property for a walkthrough, and Graham hadn't corrected him. Let them think it was business. It was easier than explaining what he couldn't quite understand himself. Across the square, under the wide iron awning of the cafe, she was there again. Hazel. Red dress half hidden beneath an oversized tan hoodie. Same canvas tote by her feet. She was seated cross-legged on the low stone bench, focused on a new drawing, her tongue poking out slightly between her lips in concentration. The scene she was sketching, he couldn't see it yet, but it didn't matter. What struck him was how still she was, how present. People passed by and dropped loose change onto her tote, barely slowing. Some greeted her by name. One woman, a florist in a blue apron, tucked a muffin into Hazel's coat pocket with a smile. "Don't forget to eat, baby girl," she said warmly before walking off. Hazel nodded, murmured,
"Yes, ma'am."
and for a second her pencil slowed. She pressed 2 fingers to her chest like she was listening for something only she could hear. Then she swallowed it down and kept drawing. The gesture struck Graham. He had spent decades building a business empire, shaking hands in glass towers, yet he had never been greeted like that. Not once. He crossed the square slowly, the sound of his polished shoes muted by the damp stone. Hazel noticed him as he approached, but didn't look surprised.
"You came back."
She said simply. "Thought I'd see how business was going," he replied. She offered him a tiny shrug.
"It's fine. People buy more when the sun's out."
He glanced down at her newest sketch, a whimsical version of Savannah's waterfront, boats outlined in bold crayon strokes, waves that danced rather than rolled. "You ever draw the places the way they really look?" She shook her head.
"I draw how I wish they felt. People smile more when they see that."
There was no trace of self-pity in her tone. No begging, no bitterness, just calm, collected logic, an emotional wisdom far older than 7. He crouched beside her, careful not to crease his suit. "Your mom teach you that?" he asked gently. Hazel paused.
"Kinda. She painted sunsets. Said if you painted enough skies, even the bad days couldn't win."
Graham's breath caught in his chest. That exact line. She used to say that to him. Marin, barefoot on a balcony with paint in her hair, waving a brush and grinning like the world couldn't touch her. He looked away, blinking hard. She was right. Hazel studied him quietly.
"You knew her."
Graham nodded once, not trusting his voice. Hazel didn't press. She went back to coloring the storefronts in gold and soft orange.
"She said people forget too fast. That's why I draw."
Forget what? Hazel didn't look up.
"The way things feel before they break."
The sentence sliced straight through him. For a moment, he didn't know what to do with his hands, so he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the postcard she'd given him the day before. It had a soft crease now, but was still intact. "I kept this," he said. "Hope that's allowed." She looked at the card in his hand, then met his eyes.
"My mom used to say people with money can fix anything
She said quietly.
if they decide to care."
Her words weren't accusatory, just honest. And for the first time in a long time, Graham didn't have an answer. No witty deflection, no business metaphor. Just silence. Cold, humbling silence. Behind them, a shop window caught their reflection. A man in a tailored navy suit kneeling beside a child in duct-taped shoes, her hoodie pulled tight, her eyes a storm of clarity. 2 people who didn't belong in the same world, and yet, somehow, did. Graham stared at the reflection for a long moment, seeing himself not as the man he'd built, but as the one he might have been if he hadn't walked away all those years ago. Then Hazel gently rolled up her drawing, slipped it into her tote, and stood.
"Nana's off work in 20 minutes. I can't be late."
Graham stood too. "Do you want a ride?" She looked at him, head slightly tilted.
"Do you think I'd get in a car with someone I just met twice?"
He smiled, genuine this time. "Fair point." She turned to leave,
her red dress peeking out from beneath the hem of her hoodie. As she walked, she passed the window of the bookstore, its glass fogged with condensation. For a second, she stopped, glancing at her own reflection. Then she kept walking. Graham remained rooted in place. His own reflection stared back at him from the bookstore glass, and he hated how unfamiliar it looked.
2 days had passed since he'd first heard her name under that flickering lamppost. It was just after 3 o'clock when Graham Wolfe found himself parked along a quiet street in Savannah's Thomas Square neighborhood, far from the high-rise suites and glass offices that had long defined his orbit. The sun hung low, casting slanted beams across crooked porches and leaf-littered sidewalks. Wind chimes tinkled faintly somewhere, mixing with the distant hum of cicadas and the soft squeak of a child's tricycle wheel turning in a neighboring yard. He told himself he wasn't following Hazel, that he just happened to be here. But the truth was simpler. He needed to understand. He needed to know where she went after the sketchpad closed and the smile faded. He needed to see her world. And then he saw her. Hazel turned the corner at the far end of the block, her tote slung over one shoulder, a wrapped muffin still clutched in one hand. She walked with small, deliberate steps, her shoes scuffing lightly over cracked concrete, the red of her dress poking beneath the frayed edge of her coat. She didn't notice the car, or maybe she did and chose not to. She turned up the walk of a modest gray house tucked between two overgrown lots. The place sagged slightly to one side, the gutters crooked, but the porch railing was wrapped in dollar store tinsel, and someone had taped a paper snowman to the door. A flicker of warmth amidst the struggle. Graham waited until she disappeared inside before stepping out of his car. Each step toward the house felt heavier than the last. This wasn't his world. Not anymore. But it had once been closer than he cared to admit. He reached the porch and knocked twice, firm but polite. Footsteps approached. Then the door cracked open. Dorothy Bennett stood there in faded scrubs, her hair pinned back in a tired bun, a dish towel still in one hand. Her eyes narrowed the instant she saw him.
"You again,"
she said. Graham nodded, awkward. "May I come in?" She didn't answer right away. Her gaze searched his face like she was reading footnotes of a book she never wanted to pick up again. "She doesn't know," he said finally. "Not everything. Not yet." Dorothy stepped back just enough to let him in. The inside of the house was clean but worn. A pine-scented candle flickered on a side table. Faint jazz played from an old radio. The furniture was mismatched, an olive couch, a chipped coffee table. But every piece had been loved. On the mantel above the faux fireplace were family photos. Hazel as a toddler, drawings taped beside them. And above it all, framed but slightly tilted, hung a painting of the Savannah riverfront at sunset. Brushstrokes bold and familiar. He stopped in front of it. "That's hers," he murmured. Dorothy nodded.
"Painted it when she was pregnant. Said she wanted Hazel to know the world could still be beautiful, even if people weren't."
Graham felt his throat tighten. "She never told me," he said.
"She didn't want to.
Dorothy replied, moving past him toward the kitchen.
And when she got sick, she said it was too late to matter."
There was no venom in her voice, just weariness. "She was wrong," he said. Dorothy turned, wiping her hands on the towel.
"Were you looking for her?"
He hesitated. "After the second year, I tried. She was just gone."
"She went to Macon for a while. Then came back here when Hazel was 2. Got a job cleaning night shifts at Memorial Hospital. Never asked for help, not even from me.
Graham's gaze dropped to the floor. She was always proud,
She was also heartbroken.
Dorothy said sharply.
She didn't talk about you much, but I could hear it in her brushstrokes.
They stood in silence for a moment. Then footsteps padded down the hall. Hazel paused like the hallway had suddenly gotten too long, drawing one careful breath through her nose before she stepped forward again, small, practiced, and trying not to show it. She peeked into the room, her braid undone, wearing a sweater too big and socks that didn't match.
You're here.
She said, more surprise than question. I am, he replied gently. Dorothy gave her a look that said, your call, then retreated into the kitchen. Hazel walked in slowly, holding a crayon in one hand and a folded sheet of paper in the other. She sat cross-legged on the couch and watched him like one of her drawings had stepped off the page.
You want some juice or something?
She asked. Graham chuckled. I'm okay. She nodded, then offered him the folded paper. He opened it carefully. It was another drawing. This time, it was of a park bench under Christmas lights. 3 stick figures again, one with a braid, one with gray hair, and the man in the navy blue suit, still marked with a question mark.
I don't know your last name,
Hazel said quietly.
but Nana said you used to know my mom.
He looked up at her. I did.
She was really good at painting. I only remember some of it. I was little.
Graham nodded. She used to paint outside, no matter the weather. Hazel smiled faintly.
She said rain made colors softer.
He smiled too. She was right. There was a beat of silence. Then Hazel pointed toward the wall.
I've been trying to draw her,
She said,
but I can't finish the face. It keeps getting blurry in my head.
Graham followed her finger to a sketch taped near the window. It was Marin's silhouette, unmistakable. Her hair, her stance. But the face, just a swirl of pencil marks, as if time had rubbed it out.
I'm scared I'll forget her.
Hazel said, barely above a whisper. You won't, he said gently. Not with a heart like yours. Hazel studied him again.
Do you miss her?
Every day. She nodded slowly.
Good.
Dorothy reappeared then, holding a plate of sliced apples and crackers. She set it down without comment.
And sat in the armchair across from them.
She's got a strong heart.
Dorothy said quietly. Graham turned to her. She gets that from both of you. Dorothy raised an eyebrow.
Don't start flattering me now. I'm immune.
Hazel giggled. The moment hung in the room like breath on glass. Fragile, temporary, but real. When it was time to go, Graham rose slowly. I should head out. Hazel looked disappointed, but she didn't say anything.
I'll see you again?
She asked. He nodded. If that's okay with your Nana. Dorothy gave a small nod.
She's got a sketch due Friday. Someone needs to check her perspective lines.
Hazel beamed. At the door, Graham hesitated. Thank you for letting me in. Dorothy didn't smile, but her voice was softer than before.
She's already drawing you,
She said.
so make sure you're someone worth drawing.
Outside, the sky had deepened into gold and plum, the last light slipping behind rooftops. As Graham walked back to his car, he realized something. He wasn't just entering Hazel's world. He was being allowed in. And he didn't want to leave.
Savannah's skies had cleared by morning, but the air still held the damp chill of a southern winter. Graham Wolfe sat in the driver's seat of his car, parked again on that quiet residential street in Thomas Square, watching as school children trudged by with backpacks and mittens. His car's engine idled, windshield wipers ticking now and then to clear away mist. But his eyes weren't on the fog. They were on the house with the crooked porch railing and the paper snowman in the window. He'd come early this time, not to speak, not to intrude, just to witness, just to understand. At 7:32 a.m., the front door opened. Hazel stepped outside, backpack slung over one shoulder, her red dress peeking out from beneath a navy coat that looked a size too big. But it wasn't her dress Graham noticed first. It was the limp, subtle but unmistakable. Her left leg favored. Her steps were slower than usual, and every few feet she'd pause to adjust the heel of her shoe. Graham leaned forward in his seat. She wasn't complaining, not even wincing, but pain was stitched into every careful step. A moment later, the door opened again, and Dorothy emerged. She was crouching on the porch, rummaging through an old canvas bag with a strip of duct tape on the bottom. Hazel sat beside her, unlacing her shoes. Graham saw it then, clear as sunlight. Dorothy was trying to patch the sole of Hazel's left shoe with a strip of silver tape, her fingers trembling from a long hospital shift. One hand braced the shoe while the other struggled to wrap the tape around the worn fabric. She worked in silence, focused, determined. Her hands, rough and chapped, were the hands of someone who did everything herself, not because she wanted to, but because there was no one else. Hazel sat quietly through it, watching her grandmother with the patience of someone who understood how to wait. Graham felt something tighten in his chest. He hadn't moved yet, but his mind was already walking toward the next moment. That afternoon, Hazel sat at her usual spot in Chippewa Square, her tote by her side, sketching again. The bench beneath her creaked as she leaned forward, pressing a smudge of blue into the river sky she was recreating from memory. Graham approached slowly, carrying a white paper bag. She looked up when his shadow touched the edge of her sketchbook. "Hey," she said, blinking against the light. "I brought cocoa," he said, offering the bag. She accepted it without hesitation, pulling out the warm cup and sipping gratefully. Her eyes fell to the box he carried in the other hand. "What's that?" He set the shoebox gently on the bench beside her. "Try them on." Hazel's brow furrowed. "I noticed your shoes," Graham said, his voice calm. "You're limping a little. Figured it couldn't hurt." Hazel stared at the box like it might bite her. "I'm not trying to be weird," he added quickly. "I just thought maybe you'd be more comfortable. You walk a lot." She didn't move. He kept his voice low. "You don't have to take them. You don't owe me anything. I just wanted you to have the choice." Hazel opened the lid slowly. Inside were a pair of brand-new waterproof sneakers, navy, with thick soles and plush insoles. Size 1. He had called 6 stores to find them. She touched them gently, as if afraid they'd vanish. "Nana says not to take things we didn't earn," she said finally. "Then let me rephrase," he replied. "You're the only person I've ever met who makes strangers stop and smile in a park with a piece of paper. I'd call that more than earned." Hazel glanced up at him. She wasn't smiling. Not yet. But her posture shifted. She removed her old shoes, revealing socks worn thin at the toes. Her feet were red from cold. Quiet pain. She slid the new shoes on slowly, then stood. She rocked back and forth. "They don't hurt," she whispered. "They're not supposed to." She gave a small nod. "Thank you." They sat in silence for a few minutes, the fountain gurgling nearby. "Can I ask you something?" Hazel said softly, wrapping both hands around her Coco. "Of course." "Do you like being rich?" Graham blinked. "That's not a question I get every day." Hazel waited, no expression on her face. He cleared his throat. "I used to think it meant everything. Security, freedom, power. But lately," he glanced at her, "it feels like a lot of noise." "Mom said money makes people louder or quieter. Depends what kind of heart they have." He turned to her. "What do you think?" Hazel sipped her cocoa. "I think you walk quiet." That stayed with him longer than it should have. As the sun dipped behind the historic rooftops and the sky turned a deeper blue, Dorothy arrived at the edge of the square, purse slung across her body, eyes immediately locking on Hazel. She didn't look surprised to see Graham sitting beside her, but she didn't look thrilled either. Hazel stood and lifted one foot proudly. "Look, they don't even pinch." Dorothy's gaze dropped to the shoes, then back to Graham. "She needed them," he said simply. Dorothy nodded once, slowly. "So do a lot of kids." "I know," he said. She paused, then stepped forward. "I've worked 23 Christmases in a row. ICU, trauma, maternity, now pediatrics. I've seen people come and go. Some stay, some promise they'll stay. But I've learned something, Mr. Wolf." "What's that?" "Don't give a child something you plan on taking away. Not kindness, not hope, and not shoes." "I'm not planning to go anywhere," he said. "Neither were half the men who came through Marin's life," she replied. Graham didn't argue. Hazel tugged her grandmother's sleeve. "He brought cocoa, too." Dorothy exhaled, somewhere between amused and resigned. "Let's go, baby girl. Homework's waiting." Hazel turned to Graham. "Do you want another postcard tomorrow?" "I'd love that." She nodded and walked off beside her Nana, each step more confident than the last. That night, Graham returned to his house on the bluff, its tall glass walls catching the moonlight. The place had never felt more empty. He poured a drink, left it untouched. Then, as he walked out to the front stoop, something fluttered against the windshield of his car. A folded sheet of paper, pinned under the wiper. He pulled it free. Crayon lines. 3 figures. One labeled me, one Nana. The third wore navy again, still with a question mark. Above them, in shaky block letters, it read, "Christmas wish?" Graham stood there for a long time, the wind curling around him like a question he hadn't yet learned how to answer. He slipped the paper into the inside pocket of his coat, right next to her first postcard, and let it rest there, warm against his chest. For once, the mansion didn't feel like armor. It felt like the waiting room of something beginning. The days that followed unfolded like watercolor, soft around the edges, quiet, but saturated with something deeper. Graham didn't make any big declarations, didn't promise the stars. He simply showed up. Each afternoon, sometime after his last meeting and before the city lights began to flicker on, he would walk into Chippewa Square with no entourage, no polished agenda. Just him, and a quiet presence Hazel never questioned. And every time, she'd already be there. Always on the same bench, legs tucked under her, hoodie sleeves pushed up, a new drawing coming to life under her fingers. They never said much, but somehow, the silence between them began to feel less like a gap and more like home. Hazel still drew cityscapes, but they started to change. The outlines became bolder, the colors warmer. In one, Graham noticed she had drawn the cathedral in glowing yellows instead of its usual gray. When he asked why, she just shrugged and said, "It looked like that in my head." Graham began bringing things, a small sketch pad of his own, buried for years in a desk drawer. One day, he slid it beside her on the bench. Hazel peeked over. "You draw?" "Used to," he admitted, flipping to a blank page. "Not very well." She handed him a pencil. "No rulers, no measuring. Just see what happens." The first time, his lines were stiff, boardroom straight, like everything else he'd built. Hazel didn't comment. She simply handed him a purple crayon and said, "Try again." So he did. Sometimes they talked about little things, what kind of pie Dorothy had made that week, or whether the bookstore cat had finally given birth. But occasionally, the quiet cracked just enough for something real to slip through. "Do you remember what your mom looked like when she was painting?" Graham asked one day, as Hazel shaded the corner of a library. Hazel paused. "Kind of. I remember the sound her brushes made in the water cup. And her sleeves were always rolled up. She had freckles. Not a lot, just right here." She pointed to the bridge of her nose. Graham smiled. She always hated them. Hazel looked at him. "You really knew her, didn't you?" "I really did." Hazel nodded, then turned back to her drawing. She laughed with her whole face. That made his chest ache in the most unexpected way. Meanwhile, his world outside the square began to bend. At a Monday morning board meeting, his CFO commented on Graham's sudden schedule changes. "You're not available most afternoons anymore," he said cautiously. "We just want to make sure everything's aligned." Graham didn't flinch. "Everything that matters is." Later that week, Tessa Lane, his head of public relations, the PR voice everyone feared, caught him outside the hotel conference room. "Someone snapped a photo of you in the square," she said, handing him her tablet. "You were sitting on a bench beside a little girl. Looks like you were sketching." Graham glanced at the image. He was smiling, unposed, present. "She's not a story," he said flatly. "I understand," Tessa replied. "But people are curious. If this is part of your life now, it's going to get noticed." He didn't answer. That night, he called Elijah Ross, his personal attorney, and the only man on earth who knew both his worth and his wounds. "I need to update my estate file," Graham said, "and look into guardianship logistics." Quietly. Elijah didn't ask questions. "Understood. I'll draw up preliminary options." Back in Chippewa Square, Hazel had begun something new. Each afternoon, she'd tape a fresh sheet to the bench and draw beside it. A companion piece, she called it. On Friday, as Graham arrived with 2 cups of cocoa, she handed him a folded page. He opened it slowly. It was the same trio: me, Nana, and the man in the suit. But this time, the question mark was gone.
In its place, in uneven, almost hesitant lettering, was a single word. Dad. Graham couldn't speak. He just stared at it, heart thudding against his ribs, the breath caught somewhere high in his chest. Hazel didn't say anything. She went right back to sketching, her feet swinging slightly under the bench. He folded the drawing carefully, reverently, and tucked it into the inside pocket of his coat, beside the Christmas wish and the first postcard. That pocket had started to feel heavier, not with burden, but with meaning. That night, after dropping by the square again just to walk its path alone, Graham pulled up to the little house in Thomas Square. The porch light was on. He stepped onto the creaky boards and knocked twice. Dorothy opened the door, not surprised to see him. "She told me what she drew today," she said. He nodded, quiet. "I don't know what to do with that," he admitted. "Not yet." Dorothy stepped aside and let him in. "Then start by showing up tomorrow, and the day after that." They sat in the living room, the jazz radio playing low again. Hazel had already gone to bed, her sketchpad curled beside her pillow, socks mismatched as always. "She's opening the door," Dorothy said, pouring him a cup of tea. "But that doesn't mean she's inviting you to take over." "I don't want to take anything," Graham replied. I want to stay." Dorothy's jaw tightened. Then she nodded once, small, reluctant. "Tomorrow I'm updating her school file," she said. "I'll put you down as a backup number. Not as trust, as a seatbelt." She looked at him then, not the man he had been or the CEO everyone else saw. Just the man sitting in her kitchen, worn at the edges. "Then earn it." He nodded. "I plan to." And for once, it wasn't a vow made to win. It was a vow made to heal.
It happened on a Tuesday. Quiet, unremarkable at first. Graham was in the middle of a quarterly review meeting, seated at the head of a long mahogany table, surrounded by executives in tailored suits. The projector hummed, charts flicked across the screen, and someone was explaining projections for the next fiscal year. Graham wasn't listening. Not really. His mind was somewhere in Chippewa Square, wondering if Hazel was sketching under the elm tree today, or if Dorothy had remembered to pack her extra pencils. Then his phone buzzed. Once. Twice. Again. He ignored it at first, standard protocol. But something about the pattern, insistent, offbeat, made him glance down. Unknown caller. He hesitated, then picked it up mid-ring and stepped away from the table, nodding to his assistant as if it were nothing. "This is Graham Wolfe." The voice on the other end was calm but clipped. "Mr. Wolfe, this is Nurse Emerson from Pulaski Elementary. I'm calling about Hazel Bennett. You're listed as an emergency contact." His stomach dropped. What happened? "She collapsed in class. She was unresponsive for several minutes. Paramedics have taken her to Memorial. She's en route now." Graham didn't remember hanging up. Didn't remember what he said to the team as he tore off his tie and walked straight out of the conference room, leaving a stunned silence behind him. All he knew was the blur of the city flashing past the windows of his car, the red lights he didn't wait for, the sound of his own pulse pounding in his ears like a war drum. When he reached the emergency room, Memorial Hospital's automatic doors slid open with a cruel kind of calm. The sterile smell of antiseptic and 2 white floors greeted him like a slap. "I'm here for Hazel Bennett," he said to the nurse behind the desk. "She was just brought in."
The woman didn't ask questions. Room 4C, pediatric wing. Her guardian is already inside. He took off down the hallway, shoes echoing, coat flapping behind him. He found Dorothy standing in the hallway, her hand clenched around a foam cup, her scrub top stained from work and worry. She looked up as he approached. "Where is she?" he demanded, voice raw. "They're running tests," Dorothy said, her voice tight. "She passed out cold. No warning. 1 second she was coloring, the next, gone." Before he could answer, a doctor in pale green scrubs appeared, clipboard in hand. She was short, no nonsense, and carried herself with a kind of calm that could only be earned in years of emergency care. "I'm Dr. Priya Nandakumar. Are you family?" Graham and Dorothy answered in unison. "Yes." The doctor nodded briskly. "Hazel has a congenital heart condition, ventricular septal defect. It's a hole between the lower chambers of her heart. Small ones sometimes heal on their own, but hers has gone undetected and untreated for too long." Graham's heart stopped. "What does that mean?"
It means her heart is working too hard. She's in early-stage heart failure. She needs surgery within the next 24 hours. "Then do it," Graham said immediately. "I'll pay, whatever it takes." Dr. Priya looked at him, unreadable. "With respect, Mr. Wolf, your bank account isn't going to get her off that table. What she needs right now isn't a CEO. It's hope. And a damn good surgeon." Graham didn't flinch. "Then be that." "We will," she said. "She's being prepped now. You can see her, but only one at a time." Dorothy looked at Graham, something heavy behind her eyes. "She asked for you." He nodded and stepped into the room, heart hammering in his chest. Hazel looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, tubes and wires trailing from her arms like threads spun from some cruel god. Her face was pale, lips chapped, hair clinging to her temple in damp wisps. When he entered, her eyes fluttered open. "You came," she whispered. "Of course I did." His voice cracked. "You scared me." "Did I mess up your meeting?" she asked, a weak smile forming. He laughed, a quiet, broken sound. "Doesn't matter." Hazel blinked slowly. "Is my heart broken?" "No," he whispered, sitting beside her and gently taking her hand. "It just needs a little help. That's all." "Will it still be mine after?" "It always will be." A silence settled between them. Machines beeped steadily. Nurses murmured behind curtains. And then, with effort, Hazel turned her head slightly. "There's something for you," she murmured. "Nana has it." "What is it?" Hazel's eyes drifted shut again. "A letter. From my mom. She said to give it if you ever came back." Her hand squeezed his once, then slipped into sleep. Later, in the waiting room, Dorothy handed him a small envelope, creased, yellowed, with his name scrawled in Marin's handwriting. He stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "If you ever find her," the words blurred. "Don't come in with money or excuses. Just come in ready to stay. She doesn't need another person to wave and vanish." Graham exhaled shakily, his hand trembling. He read further, her voice alive in the rhythm of the ink. "You didn't ruin me, Graham. I loved you, and I forgave you a long time ago.
But if you're reading this, it means you found her. Don't walk away from that twice. He reached the bottom, just as a nurse came to call him back. The last line was simple. If you stay, don't just promise. Prove it. He folded the letter, tucked it into the pocket beside Hazel's drawings, and stood. As the operating room doors swung open and Hazel disappeared behind them, Graham stood frozen in place, hands clenched, powerless. For once in his life, all his influence, all his resources, none of it could fix what mattered most. And yet, as he stood there, holding the unopened second half of Marin's letter,
Like a lifeline, something in him refused to collapse. He would stay. He would prove it. Not in the way men like him usually did, with noise, with deals, with donations, but with presence, with quiet, with love. The morning after the surgery, Savannah woke under soft sunlight, the kind that made sidewalks steam and magnolia leaves shimmer like glass. Inside Memorial Hospital, room 4C glowed with something brighter than daylight. Hazel lay curled beneath a fleece blanket with cartoon stars, one arm wrapped gently around a stuffed puppy someone from the pediatric staff had left on her pillow. Her cheeks had color again, her breathing steady. For the first time in months, maybe longer, her heart wasn't fighting her. Graham sat at her bedside, fingers loosely laced around hers. He hadn't moved in hours, hadn't slept, but something inside him had finally stilled. She stirred, blinking slowly. "Hey," she whispered, voice raspy but sure. He smiled. "Hey, Hazel. You didn't leave." "I told you I wouldn't." She took a shallow breath. "It doesn't hurt anymore. Not like before." "That's because they fixed the part that was working too hard." Hazel looked at him, brows furrowed in the faintest confusion. "Are we still the same?" He squeezed her hand gently. "Only better." Later that afternoon, Elijah Ross arrived at the hospital with a sealed manila envelope in hand. Dorothy met him in the hallway, arms crossed. She still wore her nurse badge, but her posture said grandmother first. "You trust him?" Elijah asked, voice low. "I trust what I've seen," she answered. "But that doesn't mean I'm walking away." "No one's asking you to," Graham said, stepping beside her. "Hazel needs all of us." Elijah handed over the envelope. Inside was the result Graham already knew deep down. 99.97% paternity match. It was clinical, typed in bold black text. But to Graham, it might as well have been a birth certificate carved in stone. He passed the paper to Dorothy, not out of obligation, but out of reverence. She read it, said nothing for a long beat, then finally looked at him. "She's yours," she said. "You're hers." It wasn't a declaration. It was permission. With Dorothy's quiet nod, the process began. Over the next few days, Graham met privately with Elijah to draft temporary guardianship papers. They kept everything low profile. No reporters, no press releases. Just signatures in quiet rooms and conversations laced with care. Dorothy co-signed every document, not because she doubted Graham, but because Hazel deserved protection that went beyond paperwork. The hospital released Hazel by week's end. The three of them, Hazel, Graham, and Dorothy, stepped out into the chilly winter air together. Hazel clutched his hand with one and Dorothy's with the other. And Graham, for the first time in decades, felt like he belonged exactly where he was. He brought them home. Not to the hotel, not to the boardroom, but to the mansion on Forsyth Park, the one that had stood still and silent for far too long. That first night, Hazel padded barefoot across the marble foyer, her eyes wide.
"This place echoes," she whispered.
Not for long, Graham said, already picturing the warmth to come. And it did change, quickly. Hazel had one request, she said, like it didn't matter, because wanting things had never felt safe. "If we ever get settled," she murmured, eyes on her shoes, "could we help a dog that nobody picks?" Graham didn't answer right away. He only reached for his phone, face turned so she wouldn't see what it did to him. Hazel's drawings began appearing on the refrigerator, secured with magnets shaped like fruit. Crayons spilled across the kitchen counter beside his laptop. Dorothy's teacups showed up in unexpected places, a floral one by the fireplace, a chipped mug on the porch rail. Graham installed a wooden easel by the bay windows, where the light hit just right in the mornings. Hazel called it her sunspot. One morning, Graham walked into the great room to find a new drawing taped to the mantel. 3 stick figures, arms linked, labeled simply, "Me, Nana, Dad." No question mark, no extra explanations, just presence. Still, the outside world didn't wait. Graham's assistant called twice in one day. "Tessa from PR says there are whispers," Everett said cautiously. "Rumors that you've adopted a child. The media wants a quote." "No statement," Graham said. "But sir, the board is worried about optics." "I'm not." There was a long pause on the line. Understood. He didn't owe anyone a storyline. Hazel wasn't content to be someone's headline. She was someone's daughter. That evening, as the winter sun dipped low behind the live oaks outside, Hazel sat cross-legged on the couch, painting a cityscape in pinks and oranges. Dorothy read quietly nearby. Graham sat across from them, no tie, no laptop, just watching. Hazel glanced up, brush paused. "Do you think everything will stay like this?" He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice soft but certain. "I can't promise the world won't try to shake us sometimes," he said, "but I'll be here. Always." She smiled, content, not because he said it, but because this time she believed him. Savannah moved slower now, not out of fatigue, but grace. The cold had softened, the sky stretched wider, and every corner of the historic district seemed to breathe deeper as winter gave way to a tentative spring. The moss swayed above the cobblestone streets like green lace in motion, and sunlight returned to the city with the warmth of an old friend. Inside the once silent mansion at the edge of Forsyth Park, life bloomed in its own quiet way. There were no more echoes, at least not the lonely kind. The call he'd made weeks earlier finally came due, quietly, the way the best promises do. Hazel's sneakers squeaked across the polished floor as she chased her sketchpad through the hallway, followed closely by a giggling bark from her newly adopted rescue dog, Buttons, a mutt with one floppy ear and a soul too big for his body. Crayons were wedged between couch cushions. A floral teacup had been permanently adopted by the mantel, and on the dining room wall hung a new framed drawing, Hazel's latest masterpiece. It was her mother. Marin, at last, had a face. Not a swirl, not a blur, but clear, kind eyes. Freckles. Hair swept in a bun, paintbrush in one hand, the sun blooming behind her. Hazel had drawn her from memory, but also from something else. Something that had returned as her heart healed. Safety. Graham had stood in the doorway that morning, watching Hazel tape the drawing to the wall with painter's tape and a determined expression. When she turned and saw him watching, she smiled, not with pride, but peace. "She's all here now," she said. "I remembered the rest." "She looks just like her," he whispered. Hazel shrugged. "I think she looks like me." He grinned. "You're right." Outside, a breeze rustled the lemon trees Graham had planted along the edge of the yard. Dorothy stood on the back porch, arms crossed, watching Hazel race buttons across the lawn. Her sharp eyes followed every twist, every turn, but her lips had softened. There was no suspicion anymore, just the quiet guard of someone who had loved hard and earned every scar. "You changed the locks on your heart," she said to Graham one evening as they folded laundry in the kitchen. "But she had the key the whole time." Graham nodded. "I just didn't know how to open the door." "Well," Dorothy sighed, "you're holding it wide open now." One warm afternoon, the three of them visited Bonaventure Cemetery. Not for grief, but for gratitude. Hazel carried a small drawing in a sealed plastic sleeve. Her and Graham and Dorothy, standing under a tree filled with little red hearts instead of leaves. She placed it gently beside Marin's headstone and smoothed the edges, her fingers lingering. "Hi, Mom," she whispered. "We're okay now." Dorothy knelt beside her, placing a hand on Hazel's back. Graham stood behind them both, hand resting gently on Hazel's shoulder. "We still talk about you," Hazel continued. "And we still paint." She paused. "And he stayed, Mom. He really did." They lingered in silence, the wind threading through the dogwoods, carrying something unseen. That night, back at the house, Hazel curled up next to Graham on the couch, still wrapped in the fleece blanket from the hospital. Dorothy dozed in the chair beside them, half listening to a jazz record humming in the background. Hazel looked up, studying him. "You're different now." Graham raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" "You smile with your eyes. Before it was just your mouth." He chuckled. "You've got a sharp eye." "I'm an artist," she said proudly. "Yes, you are." She nestled closer. "I'm glad you heard me cry that day, in the square." He swallowed hard, brushing a hand over her braid. "You didn't just change my day, Hazel," he said softly. "You gave me a life." A beat of quiet followed. Then, "Promise you won't stop drawing?" he asked. "Only if you keep showing up." "Deal." They sat in silence, watching the fire flicker. Buttons snored at their feet. From down the hall, the scent of something sweet baking, Dorothy's cobbler probably, drifted into the room. And on the wall above them, Hazel's drawing of Marin smiled down on them all. The mansion wasn't cold anymore. It wasn't a monument to success or silence. It was home. Built not from wealth, but from presence, from second chances, from a girl in a torn Christmas dress, and the man who finally decided to care. And that's where we'll leave this story, my friend. I don't know about you, but it really stayed with me. Sometimes all it takes is one small voice to crack open a closed heart. When we choose to stay, to listen, to show up, we don't just change a life. We find our own. Because home isn't a place, it's a promise. And love, when chosen daily, can heal even the deepest silence. Did a particular moment speak to you? I'd truly love to hear what touched your heart. Drop me a comment below. If this story meant something to you, please share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next.
And if you're in the mood for more stories like this, there's a whole playlist waiting for you right here on the screen. Thanks for spending this time with me. I'm Mr. Dawn, sending warmth your way, and I promise I'll see you again in the next story.